It was just another busy Friday night at Café Nouveau, the upscale restaurant Jasmine worked at, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the humid air that hung heavily over the city, or the way the neon lights from outside reflected off the polished marble floors. Whatever it was, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. She adjusted the apron tied around her waist and scanned the crowded dining room, balancing the heavy tray of drinks in her hands. The usual buzz of clinking silverware and chatter filled the air, but Jasmine's mind was somewhere else. Her stomach churned with anxiety, a reminder that she was behind on her rent and barely getting by. She had dreams, big ones, but the weight of bills and responsibilities threatened to crush them. She had learned a long time ago that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Table 6 is yours," Sandra, the head waitress, called out, snapping Jasmine out of her thoughts. Jasmine nodded, forcing a smile as she maneuvered through the maze of tables. She was used to the bustle of the restaurant, but tonight, she couldn't seem to shake the unease. She stopped at the corner of the restaurant, where the dim lighting made everything feel a little more intimate, a little more real. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw who was sitting at table 6. Elon Musk. She froze for a moment, her pulse racing. She'd heard rumors he was in town, but seeing him in the flesh was surreal. His black t-shirt, jeans, and baseball cap gave him the casual look of a regular guy, but there was no mistaking who he was. He was the billionaire who had changed the world: Tesla, SpaceX, even Twitter. The man who seemed untouchable, a world away from people like her. "Get it together, Jasmine," she muttered to herself, taking a deep breath. She walked over with all the composure she could muster, her nerves prickling as she approached his table. "Good evening, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Welcome to Café Nouveau. Can I start you off with some drinks?" He looked up at her, his sharp gaze meeting hers for a brief second before he gave a small nod. "A water, please. No ice." She jotted it down quickly, trying not to make it obvious that her hands were shaking. This wasn't her first time serving high-profile customers, but something about Elon Musk made this feel different. Maybe it was the fact that his presence felt so commanding, or maybe it was the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something bigger than herself. "Of course, sir," she said, giving a brief smile before turning to leave. She couldn't help but steal another glance over her shoulder as she walked toward the bar to place the order. Her heart was still racing, and she couldn't quite place the feeling in her chest. Was it excitement? Nervousness? Or something deeper? By the time she returned with his water, she had managed to steady herself. She placed the glass gently on the table, avoiding his eyes for too long. "Anything else I can get you?" Jasmine asked, her voice sounding almost too calm. "No, just the check when you're ready," Elon replied, his voice smooth but distant, the type of voice that made it clear he didn't have time for small talk. Jasmine nodded quickly and backed away, trying to hide her flushed face. As the evening progressed, the restaurant filled with laughter and the soft hum of conversation, but Jasmine's focus remained fixed on table 6. She couldn't help it. She kept glancing over, hoping for another moment to meet his eyes. Maybe she could ask him something. Just a question. It wasn't every day that someone like him walked into her life. As the night wore on, the dinner crowd began to thin out, and finally, it was time for Elon Musk to leave. Jasmine saw him signaling for the check. She grabbed it from the counter and walked over, her heart pounding once again as she placed the bill on the table. He glanced at it briefly, then looked up at her, his face unreadable. "You know," he began, his voice almost soft, "I've been to a lot of restaurants, but this one," he paused, almost as if he was searching for the right words. "I can tell the staff here really care about what they do." Jasmine felt a twinge of pride, but she didn't let it show. "Thank you, sir. We do our best." There was a brief silence before Elon handed her the check back. "Keep the change," he said, smiling slightly. Jasmine froze as she looked down at the check in her hands. The tip wasn't just generous, it was astronomical. But it wasn't the money that stopped her cold. It was the note. In elegant handwriting, someone had written a few lines, and Jasmine could barely believe her eyes. "I see your potential. Don't give up on your dreams. Keep pushing, and I'll be watching." Her breath caught in her throat. The words felt like they were written just for her, like a message sent from a world she couldn't even comprehend. Jasmine blinked hard, willing herself to remain composed. But it was no use. The tears welled up before she could stop them. She stepped back, turning toward the kitchen, her heart racing, her mind spinning. What was this? A gesture of kindness? Or something more? The kitchen doors swung open, and Jasmine stumbled into the back, feeling a sob rise in her chest. She had to get out of the public eye, had to breathe. But her emotions were flooding her. Everything from fear to disbelief to a wild, fluttering hope. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady herself, but the tears wouldn't stop. She hadn't expected this. Not tonight. Not in a million years. What was she supposed to do with this gift? With this message from someone like him? Jasmine's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She had retreated into the employee break room, a small, dimly lit space that smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. The door clicked shut behind her, blocking out the noise from the dining room, but her mind was still spinning. She couldn't stop thinking about the note. She had read it over and over again as she walked back to the kitchen, convinced she must have misread something. I see your potential. Don't give up on your dreams. Keep pushing, and I'll be watching. Was this some kind of joke? Or maybe a marketing stunt? But no, she knew it wasn't. There was something so personal about the way the words were written, as if the message was meant just for her. The tears that had come so suddenly were starting to dry on her cheeks. But the wave of emotion that had overwhelmed her wasn't gone. She couldn't stop thinking about how hard her life had been lately. Working long shifts at Café Nouveau was the only way she could keep her head above water. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The pile of bills on her kitchen counter had grown higher each month. Her student loan payments were due, and the overdue rent notice from her landlord was sitting in the drawer, unopened. She had no savings, no cushion to fall back on, and every night, after she finished work, she'd go home to a cramped apartment, where she took care of her younger brother, Marcus. Her mother had passed away 2 years ago, and Jasmine was left with the responsibility of raising Marcus, who was only 11. Their father was never around. He disappeared when Jasmine was little and never came back. Now, it was just her and Marcus, trying to make it work. There were days when Jasmine couldn't help but feel like she was drowning in the weight of everything. She had dreams, big ones. She wanted to open a small cafe, something cozy where people could gather, laugh, and forget about their problems. But with no money and no connections, it felt impossible. Every time she thought about the future, the weight of her responsibilities crushed those dreams before they could even take flight. She let out a shaky breath and ran her fingers through her messy hair. Keep pushing. The words from the note echoed in her mind. She had heard that kind of encouragement before. Her mother used to tell her that, when she was young. Keep pushing, Jasmine. You have what it takes. Don't let life knock you down. But now, Jasmine wasn't so sure. How could she keep pushing when it felt like the world was against her? How could she chase a dream when survival was all she could focus on? She glanced at the clock on the wall, and the realization hit her. She was running late for her shift. She quickly stood up, wiping her hands on her apron and adjusting her hair. She had to get back to work. Her coworkers might notice she had been gone longer than usual, and she didn't want to make a scene. She took one last look at the note, still folded neatly in her pocket, before she shoved it back in her apron and walked toward the door. She couldn't let herself get distracted by it now. Not yet. She had to focus on the reality of the present. As she stepped out into the dining area again, she could see Sandra, the head waitress, giving her a knowing look. Jasmine forced a smile and went back to her duties, taking orders, delivering food, and keeping her head down. But as the night wore on, her thoughts kept drifting back to that note. What did it really mean? Was it just a random act of kindness? Or was Elon Musk offering her something more? She couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger than she could understand. Maybe it was time to finally take a step forward. Maybe it was time to stop thinking of herself as just a waitress and start believing that she could make her dreams come true. The rest of the evening was a blur. By the time Jasmine finished her shift and clocked out, it was well past midnight. She walked out of the restaurant, her tired legs aching, and took a deep breath of the cool night air. Her mind was still racing with possibilities, but she couldn't keep running from reality. She had to face the facts. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, seeing a text message from Marcus. "Jazz, I'm hungry. Can you bring me something to eat?" Jasmine's heart sank. She had forgotten to pack lunch for him today, too distracted by her own thoughts. She glanced at the street, the bright lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The streets felt empty at this hour, the city silent, like it was holding its breath. She rubbed her face with one hand and started walking toward the nearest fast food joint. She didn't have the energy for anything fancy, and she knew Marcus wouldn't mind. As she walked, she thought about the note again. She'd have to figure out what to do with it. But right now, she needed to focus on the here and now. She needed to make sure Marcus was taken care of. She was the only one who could look after him. But in the back of her mind, a flicker of hope had ignited. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Jasmine's feet dragged along the cracked sidewalk as she made her way back to the small, modest apartment she called home. The bag of fast food she carried felt heavier than it should have, a reminder of how far she still had to go, both physically and emotionally. Marcus had texted her again while she was walking, asking if she'd brought ketchup for his fries. She smiled despite herself. He always found something to complain about, no matter how small. He was growing up fast, but at times, he still had the heart of a little boy. As she approached the apartment building, the familiar sounds of the city, distant car horns, muffled voices, the low hum of streetlights, filled her ears, but it all seemed quieter now. Jasmine's mind was preoccupied with the note from Elon Musk. The words lingered in her thoughts like a whisper she couldn't quite understand. "I see your potential. Don't give up on your dreams. Keep pushing, and I'll be watching." Had she read it wrong? Was it just a random act of kindness? Or was this someone trying to show her a different way out of the endless cycle of struggle? Jasmine had spent most of her life working to survive, not to dream. She had learned how to make ends meet, how to sacrifice her own desires for the sake of her brother. But dreams, they felt too far away, too unattainable. She shook her head, trying to clear the doubts. "Focus on what's in front of you," she reminded herself. "Marcus needs dinner, and you've got your bills to worry about." The apartment was a two-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better days. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the carpet was threadbare in spots. But it was home, and as she walked up the steps, she reminded herself that it wasn't much, but it was theirs. She unlocked the door, and the smell of old takeout containers and laundry greeted her. Marcus was sitting at the small dining table, his school bag tossed carelessly on the floor. His face lit up when he saw the food. "Finally, I was about to eat the last of the cereal," Marcus joked, running over to grab the bag from her hands. Jasmine set the bag down and watched as he tore into the fries like they were a rare delicacy. "Did you do your homework?" Jasmine asked, trying to sound casual as she kicked off her shoes and sat down across from him. "Yeah, but I need help with math," Marcus replied, his mouth full. "You know I hate numbers." Jasmine smiled despite herself. "I know. You get that from me," she said, her voice soft. She had never been good at math either, but she'd always made sure to push through for Marcus's sake. As he ate, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her mind wandering again. She knew it was a stretch to even think about the possibility that Elon Musk's note could lead to something life-changing. She didn't even know how to begin reaching out. What was she supposed to say? "Hey, remember me? The waitress you wrote a note to?" But what if this was her chance? What if, in some strange twist of fate, this was the break she'd been waiting for? Her phone buzzed in her pocket again, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out, surprised to see a message from Sandra, her manager at Café Nouveau. "Jasmine, hope you're doing well. There's a VIP event coming up at the restaurant, and we're looking for someone to help with serving. Would you be interested? It could be a great opportunity for you." Jasmine stared at the screen, her heart racing. VIP event? She knew the kind of guests who attended these events. People with money. People with influence. She'd never been invited to something like this before. And the timing, it felt like another strange coincidence. Was the universe trying to tell her something? She quickly typed a response. "Yes, absolutely. I'd love to help." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The words felt like a small step, a small sign that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take a leap. Marcus finished his food and plopped down onto the couch, flipping through a TV channel, oblivious to the storm brewing in his sister's mind. Jasmine sat back, her phone still in her hands, but this time, she wasn't worried about bills, or rent, or how she was going to make it through another month. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of possibility. She thought about the note again. Keep pushing. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but she was starting to believe it might be something more than just a passing word of encouragement. Maybe this event was the key. Maybe this was the opportunity she needed to finally break out of her rut. She didn't know how it would unfold, or even if it would lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't so sure that survival was all there was left to aim for. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was getting late, but she wasn't tired. Not anymore. The excitement that buzzed through her veins now was something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. And maybe that was the first sign that things were finally starting to change. The next few days flew by in a blur of anticipation. Jasmine barely had time to think about anything other than the upcoming VIP event at Café Nouveau. When Sandra had called her into the office to discuss the details, she had tried to keep her nerves under control, but deep down, her heart raced with excitement. This wasn't just any event. It was an exclusive gathering for some of the city's wealthiest and most influential individuals. Celebrities, entrepreneurs, business tycoons. Sandra had made it clear that this was an opportunity for Jasmine to prove herself, to show she had what it took to be part of the upper echelon of the restaurant world. Jasmine had worked at the cafe for almost a year now, but she had never been invited to anything like this before. It felt like a chance to finally step out of the shadows and into a world where her dreams weren't so out of reach. She spent the next few days preparing. She practiced walking in heels, even though they made her feet ache. She spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing her smile, making sure her appearance was impeccable. Sandra had stressed the importance of looking professional and polished for this kind of crowd. The last thing she wanted was to embarrass herself in front of people who could make or break her future. The morning of the event arrived, and Jasmine woke up early, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. Marcus was still sleeping when she left, a bowl of cereal half-eaten on the kitchen table. She quickly kissed him on the cheek before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. The ride to Café Nouveau felt surreal. She had taken the same route 100 times before, but today it felt different. Today, she wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had the potential to change her life. When she arrived, the restaurant was buzzing with energy. The staff was running around, preparing for the event, while the chefs in the back were working overtime to get everything ready. Jasmine's stomach fluttered as she slipped into her uniform and joined the team. Sandra immediately pulled her aside. "Jasmine, I'm glad you're here. You're going to be working with one of the event coordinators tonight. She's one of our best, so just follow her lead," Sandra instructed, her voice serious but encouraging. "This is your chance to make a great impression." Jasmine nodded, trying to keep the nerves at bay. She followed Sandra into the main dining area, where tables were set up with elegant white linens, crystal glasses, and polished silverware. The atmosphere was elegant and sophisticated, with soft jazz music playing in the background. A string quartet was tuning their instruments near the entrance, and waiters were placing delicate appetizers on the tables. She felt out of place at first, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been surrounded by so much luxury before, but she reminded herself that this was her moment. She could do this. Her assigned event coordinator, a woman named Clara, smiled warmly as Jasmine approached. "Hi, you must be Jasmine," Clara said with a firm handshake. "I'm Clara. I'll be working with you tonight. We're going to make this event unforgettable." Jasmine smiled back, trying to hide her nerves. "I'm ready." Clara gave her a quick rundown of the evening's schedule, and before long, Jasmine was on the floor, taking drink orders and serving appetizers with a level of precision she hadn't known she was capable of. The guests were all dressed in designer suits and expensive gowns, their conversations flowing effortlessly as they sipped wine and discussed business deals, art, and travel. Jasmine could hardly believe she was part of it. As the night wore on, she began to feel more at ease. The guests were polite, even if a bit distant, and Jasmine quickly learned to anticipate their needs, moving gracefully between tables, serving food, and making small talk when needed. She found herself smiling more than she had in a long time, feeling a strange sense of belonging in this luxurious environment. Maybe she wasn't so out of place after all. Then, around 9 p.m., something happened that she would never forget. She was making her way across the room with a tray of wine glasses when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, surprised to find none other than Elon Musk standing there, his sharp eyes looking right at her. "Well, I'm glad you think so," Jasmine said, her voice steady, though inside, she was still processing everything. "I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'll keep working hard." Sandra smiled, her eyes gleaming with encouragement. "Keep that attitude. Keep pushing, and let me know if you ever need anything." Jasmine thanked Sandra, then made her way out into the cool night air, her mind racing. As she walked to the bus stop, she couldn't help but think of Marcus. He was waiting for her at home, likely curled up on the couch with his favorite video game, oblivious to the whirlwind of events that had taken place tonight. Jasmine needed to go back to being the responsible older sister, the one who kept things steady for Marcus. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. Maybe it was time to start believing in myself. When she got home, Marcus was asleep, his face pressed against the pillow. Jasmine took a moment to watch him, a wave of love and protectiveness washing over her. He was the reason she kept going. He was her anchor. But she also knew that she couldn't keep living her life for him alone. She had to find a way to make her own dreams a reality, not just for Marcus, but for herself. She pulled out her phone and reread the text from Sandra one more time. "You've got the potential to go places. What if I could?" The question lingered in the air, almost daring her to believe it. Jasmine wasn't sure how or where to start, but she knew that the first step had already been taken. This night, the event, the words of encouragement, the small interactions, had opened her eyes to a new possibility. She pulled up her messages and typed a quick text to Sandra. "Thank you again for the opportunity tonight. I won't let you down." As soon as she sent it, her phone buzzed with a reply. "I know you won't, Jasmine. You've got the drive. Just keep pushing. And remember, the world is bigger than you think." Jasmine let out a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm settle in her chest. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like it was a path worth walking. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work, long hours, and a creeping sense of unease. Jasmine was still processing everything that had happened at the VIP event. She kept replaying the brief conversation with Elon Musk in her head, wondering if it had been a fluke or if there was something more to it. Sandra's words about her potential echoed constantly in her mind, but with every passing day, Jasmine found it harder to shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something huge, but she wasn't sure what. One quiet evening after her shift, Sandra approached Jasmine again, this time with a different energy. She wasn't just offering praise. There was something more in her eyes, something serious, something that made Jasmine's heart race a little faster. "Jasmine, I need to talk to you," Sandra began, her voice low, yet urgent. "There's an opportunity coming up, and I think you're the right person for it." Jasmine felt her stomach flip. She had no idea what Sandra was talking about, but she couldn't deny the sense of anticipation that filled the air. "What kind of opportunity?" Jasmine asked, her voice betraying the curiosity she could barely contain. Sandra gave her a long, appraising look. "There's a new venture being launched by one of our biggest investors. They're opening a new luxury restaurant downtown, and they need someone to help with the front-of-house operations. It's a big step up, managing staff, working with high-profile clients, overseeing events." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the chance she had been waiting for. It sounded like the kind of opportunity that only came around once in a lifetime. But there was a catch, wasn't there? Sandra must have read the hesitation in her expression because she quickly added, "I know you might be wondering if you're ready for this. But trust me, Jasmine. I've seen your work, and I know you have what it takes. All you need is someone to give you a push, and I think I can be that person." Jasmine swallowed hard. The idea of managing a luxury restaurant, of stepping up in her career, was both exciting and terrifying. Could she really do this? What would it mean for her and Marcus? And what would it mean for her life? Do you really think I'm ready? Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was struggling to believe in herself, but Sandra's confidence in her was like a lifeline. Sandra smiled, the warmth returning to her expression. I wouldn't offer this to you if I didn't. You've got the drive, Jasmine, and now you've got a chance to prove it. For a moment, Jasmine stood there, silent, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had worked so hard to get to this point, to make sure Marcus was taken care of, to ensure her future was stable. But what if this was the moment when she could finally take a step out of the shadows and into the light? But the fear of failing still lingered at the back of her mind. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she let everyone down, especially Marcus? The thought of stepping into something so big felt overwhelming. But then she remembered the conversation with Elon Musk, the way his words had lingered in her mind. Don't let life hold you back. Could she really let this opportunity slip away? I'll do it, Jasmine said, her voice steady. I'll take the job. Sandra's smile widened, and she clapped her hands together. I knew you would. I'm so proud of you, Jasmine. This is just the beginning. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and introductions to the new team at the luxury restaurant. Jasmine found herself immersed in a completely different world. One of sleek marble countertops, polished silverware, and a clientele that spoke in hushed, reverent tones. It was a stark contrast to the familiar, cozy atmosphere of Café Nouveau, and Jasmine had to remind herself several times that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. As she settled into her new role, the pressure mounted. Managing a team of experienced servers, working with event coordinators, and overseeing the high-profile guests who frequented the establishment was no small feat. Jasmine was stretched thin, constantly moving from one task to another, trying to prove herself to the owners and the staff. But despite the overwhelming nature of the job, Jasmine felt something new rising within her, a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Every time she solved a problem, helped a guest, or led a successful event, her confidence grew. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. One night, after a particularly stressful event, Jasmine found herself at the bar, nursing a drink and taking a moment to decompress. She had just helped coordinate a dinner for a major celebrity, and the night had been a success. But as she looked around the room, she felt a sense of loneliness creep in. She had achieved so much already, but it was hard not to feel disconnected from the people around her. She hadn't seen Marcus in days, and her personal life was beginning to feel like a distant memory. Was all this worth it? She sighed, stirring her drink absently. That was when she heard a familiar voice from behind her. You look like you could use a break. Jasmine turned, startled to find Elon Musk standing there, his expression warm but with an air of curiosity. He was dressed casually this time, nothing like the polished look he had worn at the event. Mr. Musk, Jasmine said, a little surprised. What are you doing here? Elon smiled. Just enjoying a drink. I wanted to see how you were doing, Jasmine. I haven't forgotten our conversation. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. I'm doing well, thank you. A little overwhelmed, but, she trailed off, unsure of how to express everything that was going on in her mind. Elon nodded as if he understood completely. Life has a way of pushing you to the limit, he said quietly. But remember, you don't have to do it alone. The path to success is never a straight line. It's okay to take a step back and breathe. Jasmine gave a small, surprised laugh. I didn't expect to hear that from you. Elon shrugged. I've learned a thing or two along the way. Just don't forget to take care of yourself. You can't help anyone else if you're running on empty. Jasmine smiled, feeling a little lighter than she had in days. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Jasmine's life had become a blur of work, responsibility, and quiet moments of introspection. After her conversation with Elon Musk, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. The path to success is never a straight line. It had been a simple phrase, but it resonated with her deeply. She had always been someone who believed that hard work and sacrifice would eventually pay off, that if she just kept her head down and kept pushing, things would eventually fall into place. But was that really the right way to live? The pressure to succeed was starting to take its toll. At the luxury restaurant, her role had grown steadily, but so had her workload. Every day was a new challenge, and though she was thriving in her career, Jasmine couldn't help but feel something was missing. Was she sacrificing too much? As the days passed, Jasmine found herself exhausted, emotionally drained, and disconnected from the world around her. She hadn't seen Marcus in what felt like ages. The text messages she sent him were never enough to bridge the gap between them. Their once tight bond was now strained, and Jasmine felt guilty for not being there for him as much as she used to be. She was trying to create a better life for both of them, but at what cost? One late evening, after another high-end event at the restaurant, Jasmine found herself standing on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. The cool night air felt refreshing, but the weight of the last few months was heavy on her shoulders. She hadn't had a chance to take a breath, let alone think about what she truly wanted. That's when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You okay?" Sandra asked softly. Jasmine turned to find her manager standing there, a concerned look on her face. "I'm fine," Jasmine said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Sandra stepped forward, her expression softening. "I know you're doing your best, Jasmine, but you're not going to be any good to anyone if you burn out." Jasmine frowned. "I'm not burning out. I'm just figuring things out." Sandra raised an eyebrow. Figuring things out or running from something? Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she'd been avoiding the question until now. The question of who she was becoming and what she was doing this all for. She had pushed so hard for so long that she'd never stopped to ask herself if it was worth it. "I don't know," Jasmine admitted. "I guess I've been so focused on getting ahead that I haven't thought about what I actually want. What if I'm just chasing something that's not even what I need?" Sandra's gaze softened, and she stepped closer. "I think you already know the answer to that, Jasmine. You've been pushing yourself for so long, trying to prove something, either to yourself or to the world. But you're more than just your job, more than just your responsibilities. You deserve to be happy." Jasmine's throat tightened, and she fought back the lump that had formed there. The idea of being more than what she'd become seemed almost impossible. She had built her entire identity around surviving, around making sure that Marcus had everything he needed. But had she forgotten how to live for herself? "You're right," Jasmine whispered, "but I'm scared. Scared that if I stop, everything will fall apart. That I won't be enough." Sandra placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Jasmine, you've already done more than most people ever could. You've built a life from the ground up. But don't forget that you're allowed to live for yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Jasmine nodded, a few tears slipping down her cheeks. She hadn't allowed herself to feel anything for so long, and now, all the emotions she had buried inside her came rushing to the surface. She hadn't realized how much she needed this, to hear that it was okay to slow down, to take a step back. "I don't even know where to start," Jasmine said, wiping her eyes. "I've been so focused on Marcus and making sure he's okay. But what about me?" Sandra smiled softly. "You start by taking a moment for yourself. You're not alone in this, Jasmine. You don't have to carry everything on your own." For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt a sense of relief. It wasn't a solution to all her problems, but it was a start. Maybe it was time to rediscover who she was outside of being a caretaker, a worker, a survivor. Maybe it was time to live for herself. That night, as Jasmine headed home, she felt a shift within her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of it all pressing down on her. She could take a breath. She could take a step back. She was allowed to. At home, Marcus was waiting for her, just as she had left him. He was on the couch, playing his game, but when he saw her walk through the door, he paused and looked up, a smile lighting up his face. "Hey, you're home. How was work?" he asked, his voice full of energy. Jasmine sat down beside him, letting out a deep breath. "It was a long day," she said, then paused. "But I'm home now, and that's what matters." Marcus grinned. "Good. I missed you." Jasmine smiled back, her heart swelling with love for him. Maybe she didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let anything pull her away from what truly mattered. The days after her heart-to-heart with Sandra felt like a turning point for Jasmine. She hadn't made any big decisions yet, but a small shift had begun within her. She was starting to see the possibility of a life that wasn't dictated solely by responsibility and survival. It was as if a fog was lifting, revealing a future she had never really allowed herself to imagine. That weekend, as she prepared for another shift at the restaurant, Jasmine felt an unexpected sense of clarity. It wasn't about making huge changes all at once. It was about small, intentional choices, choosing to live for herself again, choosing to find a balance between her career, her responsibilities to Marcus, and the parts of herself that had long been buried. The restaurant had been busy all week, as expected, but this shift felt different. Jasmine was more present, more focused on the moments in front of her. She still worked hard, but her mind wasn't constantly racing ahead, worrying about what was next or how she was going to juggle everything. She was here, in the now. As she approached the front counter to greet her next table, she was surprised to see Elon Musk sitting by the window, looking over a tablet. He looked up as she approached, his usual calm demeanor evident, but this time, there was something else in his expression, a slight curiosity, almost as if he was waiting for something. "Jasmine," Elon greeted her, his voice warm. "I didn't expect to see you here today. How's everything going?" She paused for a moment, surprised by his presence, but she quickly composed herself. "It's going well," she replied, giving him a genuine smile. "A little hectic, but I'm managing." Elon nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "I can see that. I've been watching you lately, Jasmine. You're doing a great job, but I have a feeling you're also at a crossroads in your life." Jasmine felt a slight pang in her chest. It was as though Elon could read her thoughts. She had been trying so hard to focus on her work, to make everything perfect, that she hadn't realized how much of her energy had gone into running away from the hard questions. The ones that asked her what she truly wanted, who she truly wanted to be. "I guess you could say that," she said softly, unsure of where this conversation was going but unable to look away from his steady gaze. "I'm figuring some things out." Elon smiled slightly, his tone now more serious. "I get that. But let me give you some advice, Jasmine. You don't have to have everything figured out all at once. Life is a process, not a race. Sometimes it's about taking one step at a time, and sometimes it's about being open to opportunities when they come along." Jasmine blinked. "Opportunities?" Elon leaned back in his chair, setting the tablet down and meeting her gaze. "There's a chance to join a project I'm working on. It's a bit unconventional, but it's a chance to make a real difference. And I think you're the right person for it." Jasmine's mind raced. Was this the moment she'd been waiting for? Another opportunity to step into something bigger? To break out of the cycle she had been living in? But doubt crept in quickly. Could she leave her current life behind? Could she take this chance without knowing what it would truly mean? She opened her mouth to respond, but Elon continued before she could speak. "You've got potential, Jasmine. Don't let fear or uncertainty hold you back," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." Jasmine stood there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always prided herself on her resilience, on her ability to handle whatever came her way. But this was different. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, taking a chance on herself. "What kind of project?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elon leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "It's a startup initiative, a social enterprise focused on sustainable energy solutions. We're building something that could change the world. And we need someone with your people skills, your drive, someone who can bring people together." Jasmine felt her heart race. It sounded too good to be true. A chance to do something meaningful, something that aligned with her values. But could she really take the leap? Could she risk everything she had built so far? As if sensing her hesitation, Elon added, "I know it's a big decision, but sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Jasmine just stared at him, trying to process everything. The idea of stepping away from the restaurant, from everything she had worked for, felt terrifying. But then, she thought about the person she wanted to be, the woman who didn't just survive, but thrived. The woman who chose to take chances. I need some time to think about it, Jasmine said, her voice steady. This is a lot to consider. Elon nodded, clearly understanding. Take all the time you need. But remember, opportunities like this don't come every day. As Jasmine walked away to attend to her other tables, her mind was reeling. She had spent so much of her life just getting by. But now, there was something more. Something bigger. Could this be the chance she needed to truly step into her future? Later that night, after the last guest had left, Jasmine sat alone in the empty restaurant, reflecting on everything that had happened. Elon's offer was tempting, but the weight of her responsibilities, Marcus, her work, the life she had built, pulled at her heart. Could she really let it all go? But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about letting go. It was about expanding. Maybe she could still be there for Marcus, still find a way to care for him while stepping into a new chapter of her own life. For the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt a spark of hope, a feeling that, whatever decision she made, it was hers to own. And that made all the difference. The days that followed were a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Jasmine couldn't stop thinking about Elon's offer, about the possibilities it presented. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just a career opportunity. It was a chance to transform her entire life. It was a crossroads, and the road she chose could change everything. That Saturday, after another long shift at the restaurant, Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, the quiet of the apartment surrounding her. Marcus had gone to bed early, his usual enthusiasm drained after a busy week at school. Jasmine's heart ached at the thought of him, wondering if she was making the right decision. If she left the restaurant, would it all fall apart? Could she keep him safe and happy, while also chasing her own dreams? The doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, and when she opened the door, her heart skipped a beat. Standing in front of her was Sandra, her manager, holding a small bag. "Hey," Sandra said with a warm smile. "I thought you might need a little break. I picked up some coffee and pastries on my way over. Mind if I join you for a bit?" Jasmine stepped aside, motioning for Sandra to come in. The two sat at the small table, the steam from their coffee filling the air as they unpacked the pastries. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Sandra said, taking a sip, "but I figured you might need a friend to talk to." Jasmine smiled faintly, grateful for the gesture. She hadn't realized just how much she needed someone to talk to until now. "I've been thinking a lot," she said slowly, her eyes flicking to the table as if the words might be hiding there. "About the offer. About everything." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "The offer from Elon?" Jasmine nodded. "Yeah, it's tempting, but it's also terrifying. I'm scared, Sandra. I don't know if I'm ready to leave everything behind, even though I feel like I need to." Sandra leaned back in her chair, her eyes soft with understanding. "I get it. It's a huge decision, but you have to ask yourself, if you don't take this chance, will you regret it?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure what the answer was. Could she live with herself, knowing that she turned down something that could change her life, just because she was scared? The thought of staying in her current routine, the long shifts, the constant juggling of work and home life, made her feel suffocated. But the thought of walking away from the only life she knew, the life that had kept her afloat for so long, was just as daunting. "You've been so strong, Jasmine," Sandra said gently. "But remember, strength isn't just about pushing through, about surviving. It's about making choices that push you forward. And sometimes that means taking risks. You've already sacrificed so much. Maybe it's time to put yourself first." Jasmine's eyes filled with emotion as Sandra's words hit home. She had spent so many years putting everyone else first. Marcus, her job, her responsibilities. She had convinced herself that there was no room for her dreams, no time for her needs. But maybe Sandra was right. Maybe it was time to take a chance on herself. The silence between them felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that allowed for introspection, for new realizations to take shape. Jasmine looked up at Sandra, her heart beating a little faster. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I'm ready. I have to try." Sandra smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. I knew you'd get there. Just remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Take one step at a time. And no matter what happens, you're not alone. Jasmine felt a surge of emotion, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking control of her own destiny. It wasn't about abandoning her responsibilities or her past. It was about creating a new path forward, one where she could grow and thrive. For her, as Sandra left, Jasmine sat alone for a few more minutes, her mind racing. There was still so much to figure out. The logistics of leaving the restaurant, the implications of taking a risk on a new career, and, perhaps most importantly, how to explain it to Marcus. But she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about a job. It was about her future, about her happiness, about finding balance and fulfillment in a life she had long neglected. The next day, Jasmine made the call. Elon's assistant answered, and after a brief exchange, she was scheduled for a meeting the following week. She hung up the phone, a weight lifting from her chest. She hadn't made any final decisions, but she had taken the first step. As she looked out the window at the bustling city below, Jasmine realized that life was full of possibilities. She just had to be brave enough to seize them. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. That night, as she tucked Marcus into bed, she kissed him goodnight, her heart full of hope. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. But it's time to start living for myself, too. The following week, Jasmine found herself pacing in her small apartment, her stomach a knot of nerves. The meeting with Elon Musk was tomorrow, and she was barely able to focus on anything else. She had been preparing, thinking about what to say, how to present herself, her mind running through 100 possible scenarios. But no matter how much she practiced, no matter how many times she told herself she was ready, doubt crept in like a shadow. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she couldn't handle the job? What if she ended up failing? Stop it, she told herself. You've got this. You've handled worse. Still, the thought of walking into that meeting, the meeting that could change the trajectory of her life, felt overwhelming. Jasmine, breathe, she muttered under her breath as she straightened her blouse in the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, the woman who had spent so many years keeping her head down, surviving. But the woman staring back at her now was different. She was stronger. She was ready to take on something bigger. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. Would Elon like her? Would he see the potential she knew she had? She had spent so many years trying to just get by, but this was different. This wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. When the alarm went off the next morning, Jasmine felt like she hadn't slept at all. But she pushed herself out of bed anyway, dressing quickly and grabbing a quick breakfast. She barely had time to think, her mind still consumed with the weight of what was to come. As she stepped out of the apartment and into the brisk morning air, she tried to steady her breath. The office where she was meeting Elon was sleek and modern, a high-rise building in the heart of the city. She arrived early, the elevator ride to the top floor making her heart pound faster with each passing second. This is it. This is real. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile, and within minutes, she was escorted into a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the skyline. Elon Musk was already there, sitting at the head of the table, his usual calm and composed demeanor in full force. Jasmine, thank you for coming, Elon said, standing as she entered. He motioned for her to sit. I'm glad you made it. How are you doing? Jasmine took a deep breath. I'm doing good. Nervous, but good, she replied, offering a small, nervous smile. Elon chuckled lightly. Nervous is good. It means you care. And that's what I like to see. Jasmine smiled, feeling a small sense of relief. His presence was both intimidating and reassuring, like a force that could either lift her up or crush her. But today, it felt like he was on her side. So, Elon continued, leaning forward, I'm glad you're here. I think you could be a great fit for what we're building, but I want to hear from you. What's driving you to make this change? Why leave the safety of what you know? Jasmine hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal. But then, remembering the conversation she'd had with Sandra, she decided to be honest. I've spent so many years just trying to keep up. You know, juggling work, family, and everything else. But lately, I've been realizing that I've been living my life on autopilot. I've been focused on survival, not on thriving. And I want more than that. I want to be a part of something that matters. Elon studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he nodded. I like that. You're not here just for a paycheck. You're here because you want to make a difference. And that's the kind of mentality we need. We need people who are willing to challenge the status quo and push boundaries. Jasmine's heart raced, but in a good way now. She could feel the energy in the room shift, a sense of excitement building as they continued to talk. Elon outlined the vision for the social enterprise, explaining the sustainable energy projects they were working on and how they were trying to revolutionize the way people thought about the future. As he spoke, Jasmine's mind raced with ideas, possibilities, and excitement. This was exactly what she had been looking for. An opportunity to contribute to something bigger than herself, something that could change the world. The more she listened, the more she realized this wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to truly live up to her potential. Elon paused, studying her for a moment. I think you've got what it takes, Jasmine. But this won't be easy. We're working on a fast timeline, and we need people who can keep up with the pressure. Jasmine nodded, her confidence growing. I'm ready for that. I've worked under pressure before, and I know how to handle it. I'm not afraid of hard work. Elon smiled, impressed. Good. I believe you. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing the specifics of the role, the team she would be working with, and the direction the company was heading. Jasmine asked questions, shared her thoughts, and by the end of the conversation, she felt like she was a part of something exciting, something she could see herself growing in. As they wrapped up the meeting, Elon stood and extended his hand. Jasmine, welcome aboard. We're excited to have you on the team. Jasmine shook his hand, her heart soaring. She had done it. She had taken the leap, and it had paid off. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was on the path to something incredible. The first week at her new job felt like a blur. Jasmine could hardly believe it. After years of serving tables, after all the sacrifices and struggles, she was finally stepping into something that felt meaningful. But with that excitement came an undercurrent of nerves. The pace was fast, the expectations high, and every moment felt like a test. She had always been a hard worker, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about succeeding, about proving to herself that she was capable of more than just scraping by. The projects were complicated, the deadlines tight, and the stakes higher than she had ever imagined. Each day, she found herself in new meetings, listening intently as colleagues talked about futuristic technology, clean energy solutions, and the vision of a better world. They spoke with such passion, their words filled with purpose, and Jasmine felt a growing sense of awe. She had worked in restaurants all her life, serving food and offering hospitality. Now, she was a part of something that could change lives on a global scale. But with this new world came new challenges. Her first task was to dive into research for a new renewable energy initiative the company was launching. She spent hours poring over data, meeting with engineers and strategists, and trying to wrap her mind around the scope of it all. The technical jargon was sometimes overwhelming, but she pushed through, determined to catch up. One evening, after another long day, Jasmine sat in the company lounge, reviewing her notes. Her laptop screen blurred before her eyes, the weight of the day starting to catch up with her. She hadn't even realized how tired she was until now. Hey, you doing okay? A voice interrupted her thoughts. Jasmine looked up to see Ethan, one of the team members she had met during her first week. He was younger than she was, his energy boundless, always the one to keep things light during team meetings. He had noticed her struggling earlier with a report, and now, he was standing there with a cup of coffee in his hand. I'm good, she replied, forcing a smile. Just a lot to process, you know? Ethan grinned, sitting down across from her. Yeah, I get that. But listen, don't be too hard on yourself. You're new, and it's a lot to take in. You've got this. Jasmine sighed, her exhaustion showing. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head. Like everyone else has been doing this for years, and I'm just catching up. Ethan leaned forward, his smile turning more serious. Trust me, I get it. I was in your shoes when I first started. But the thing is, this place is all about learning. We're all still figuring it out, even the veterans. You're here because you bring something to the table. You have a different perspective, and that's valuable. Jasmine looked at him, appreciating his words. She had heard similar sentiments before, but hearing them from a peer, someone who had been through the same things, made them feel more genuine. She had always believed in the value of hard work, but now she had to believe in herself too. Thanks, Ethan. I needed to hear that, she said softly, her shoulders relaxing a little. No problem. And hey, he added, a mischievous grin creeping across his face, if you ever need help with anything, just let me know. I know my way around spreadsheets and can give you a crash course. Jasmine laughed, feeling a bit of the tension lift. I might take you up on that. The next few days flew by as Jasmine threw herself into the work. She felt a sense of pride in the tasks she completed, no matter how small. Each report she helped compile, each presentation she contributed to, felt like a small victory. She was learning, she was growing, and more than anything, she was proving to herself that she belonged here. But with the work came the inevitable comparison to her old life. At night, after she finally managed to pry herself away from her laptop, she would come home to an apartment that now felt more distant. Marcus had been spending more time with his friends lately, and while Jasmine was happy that he was thriving, there was a part of her that felt guilty. Was she spending too much time at the office? Was she sacrificing too much of their time together for her career? As she sat on the edge of her bed that night, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus. Hey, Mom. Are you coming home soon? I miss you. Jasmine's heart ached as she read the message. It was a reminder of why she had worked so hard for so many years to give Marcus a better life. But now, she was unsure of how to balance this new chapter with her responsibilities as a mother. She typed a quick response, I miss you too, sweetheart. I'll be home soon. We'll have a movie night, just us. After sending the message, she lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. There was still so much to figure out. The work was exciting, but it came at a price. She needed to find a way to balance the demands of her new career with the demands of being a mother. She couldn't afford to lose sight of what mattered most. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from her email. It was a reminder about the upcoming company gala, a major event where Elon Musk would be giving a keynote address. It was a big opportunity for her to network, to solidify her place in the company. Jasmine sighed, rubbing her eyes. She had so much on her plate already, but she couldn't afford to miss the event. It was her chance to make a lasting impression, to prove she was more than just a newcomer. As the days continued to blur together, Jasmine knew she had to keep pushing forward. But she also knew that finding the right balance would be the hardest challenge of all. The stakes were higher now. Her future, Marcus's future, and the life she had always dreamed of. The company gala was everything Jasmine had imagined and more. Glamorous, grand, and filled with high-powered executives, innovators, and game-changers. The venue was a lavish ballroom with glittering chandeliers, soft music playing in the background, and long, elegant tables adorned with fine linens and candles. Jasmine had never seen anything like it. She stood at the edge of the room, feeling like a small fish in an ocean of sharks. She had spent the day preparing, trying to pick out the perfect dress, getting her hair just right, and rehearsing what she might say if she had the chance to speak to someone important. But now, standing there in the midst of it all, she felt completely out of place. Everyone seemed so confident, so at ease, while she couldn't stop fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Jasmine? She turned, surprised to see Elon Musk himself standing behind her. He was dressed in a sleek suit, looking effortlessly sharp as always. His presence was commanding, but his expression was warm, almost like he was waiting for her to respond. Hey, she said, her voice betraying the nervousness she felt. Hi, Mr. Musk. It's good to see you again. Elon gave her a kind smile, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. I told you to call me Elon, remember? No need for formalities here. Jasmine blinked, caught off guard. Right, sorry. I, just wasn't sure if... He laughed softly. Relax. You're doing great. For a moment, the bustling sounds of the gala seemed to fade away as Elon took a step closer. He gestured to the crowd around them, and Jasmine noticed how effortlessly he commanded attention. People walked by, some giving him a nod, others stopping to engage in brief conversations. It was clear that he was the center of it all. "I was hoping we could chat for a moment, if you're free," Elon said, his tone casual but sincere. Jasmine's heart skipped. This was her moment. She had to make the most of it. "Of course," she said, straightening up and trying to calm her nerves. They moved away from the crowded floor, finding a quiet corner where they could talk without being interrupted. The clink of glasses and quiet laughter from the partygoers drifted in the background, but Jasmine was only focused on Elon. "So, how's everything going?" Elon asked as they both took a seat at a nearby table. "I know it's been a couple of weeks since we spoke, and I just wanted to check in. How are you settling into your role?" Jasmine smiled, feeling a little more at ease. This wasn't a formal meeting. It felt more like a friendly conversation. "It's been great, actually. Challenging, but in a good way. I've been learning a lot, and I think I'm starting to get the hang of things. Everyone here is so knowledgeable. It's a lot to keep up with, but I'm enjoying the process." Elon nodded thoughtfully, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his wine glass. "Good to hear. You know, I remember when I started out, back when I was getting into the tech world. It was intimidating too, but sometimes you just have to take that first step and trust that the rest will follow. You're doing the right thing by sticking with it." Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of relief hearing those words. Elon, a man who had built empires, who had changed the world with his ideas, was telling her that it was okay to feel overwhelmed. That gave her a boost of confidence. "Thank you, Elon," she said sincerely. "It means a lot to hear that from you." He smiled. "Of course. You've got something special, Jasmine. I've seen it in you since our first meeting. I think you have a lot to offer this company, and I'm excited to see what you'll do." The conversation shifted then, from work to more personal matters. They talked about everything from their favorite books to their experiences with technology and innovation. For a moment, Jasmine forgot where she was. She forgot about the towering figures around her, about the grandiose event, and just focused on the person in front of her. Elon's genuine curiosity and thoughtful questions made her feel heard in a way she hadn't expected. As the evening went on, the gala began to feel more like a celebration of all the work the company had done, and Jasmine found herself swept up in the energy of it all. She even took a few moments to talk with some of her colleagues, discussing ideas she had for future projects and networking with people who had been in the industry for years. She was starting to feel like she belonged, like she had a voice here, and that was a powerful feeling. At the end of the night, as the last of the guests began to leave, Elon approached Jasmine once more. He was standing by the exit, a smile on his face, clearly pleased with the way the night had gone. "I hope you enjoyed the evening," he said. "It was good talking to you." "It was amazing," Jasmine replied, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "I didn't expect to have this much fun, or to learn so much." Elon chuckled, offering her a handshake. "That's the spirit. Keep that mindset, and you'll go far." Jasmine shook his hand, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The night had turned out to be more than just a business event. It had been an opportunity to connect, to learn, and to grow. She had walked in unsure of her place, but by the end of the evening, she felt like she had found it. As she left the gala and stepped into the cool night air, Jasmine took a deep breath. She had taken another step forward in her journey, and there was no going back now. Jasmine woke up to the soft sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was early, and the sun was barely peeking through the blinds, casting a muted light across the room. She groggily reached for her phone and saw that it was a text from Marcus. "Mom, can you come to my soccer game today? I really want you there." Her heart sank. She had forgotten about the game. It wasn't intentional. She had simply been caught up in the whirlwind of her new job, the long hours at the office, the pressure to prove herself, and the constant push to perform at her best. It was all starting to feel like too much. There were too many demands pulling her in different directions, and she couldn't keep up. "I'm really sorry, Marcus. I've got work today. I'll make it up to you, I promise." She sent the text with a heavy sigh, already feeling the guilt wash over her. It wasn't the first time she had to miss one of Marcus's games, and it wouldn't be the last. She hated that this was becoming a pattern. Her role at the company was important, but so was being there for her son. Jasmine lay back against her pillow, staring at the ceiling. The guilt was gnawing at her, and the pressure was building. She had worked so hard to get here, to prove that she was more than just a waitress. She was a part of something bigger now. But with every new achievement came the weight of new expectations. And with every new expectation, there was less time for the things that mattered most, like being a mother, like being present for the people who depended on her. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call from her boss. She quickly answered, hoping to shake off the feelings of guilt. "Jasmine, how's everything going with the research for the Renewable Energy Initiative? I wanted to check in before the end-of-month presentation," her boss, Mr. Thompson, said. "I'm on it," Jasmine replied, trying to sound confident despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I'm just putting together the final details. It's coming together." Good. "I know you've got a lot on your plate, but I'm confident you're going to knock this out of the park." Jasmine nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Thanks. I won't let you down." After hanging up, she sat on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands. It was one thing after another. The presentation was important, yes, but so was Marcus. He was growing up fast, and she was missing it. She was trying to juggle it all, work, motherhood, and everything in between, but it was starting to feel impossible. The pressure only intensified as the days went by. Jasmine spent the majority of her waking hours at the office, barely seeing Marcus except for quick conversations before bed. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was the reality she was living. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made to get to this point, leaving behind the long hours in the restaurant, moving into a new career, climbing the corporate ladder. But it wasn't enough. Not when it felt like she was losing her son in the process. One evening, as she picked up Marcus from school, she saw the disappointment in his eyes when he realized she wasn't taking him to his favorite diner for their usual dinner. "I thought we were going to get pizza, Mom," he said, his voice small. Jasmine's heart twisted. "I'm really sorry, buddy. I have to finish some work tonight. But I promise, we'll do it tomorrow, okay?" Marcus didn't say anything, but the sadness on his face spoke volumes. He had been so understanding, but she could see it in his eyes. He was beginning to feel the weight of her absence. The next few days were a blur. Jasmine worked late into the evening, revising the presentation, gathering the necessary data, and doing everything she could to make sure she was ready. The stakes were high. This presentation could make or break her career. But the more time she spent at the office, the more distant she felt from Marcus. One evening, after yet another late night at work, Jasmine came home to find Marcus already asleep. She stood in the doorway of his room, watching him breathe peacefully in his sleep. The weight of everything hit her like a ton of bricks. Was this worth it? Was all the success in the world worth it if she wasn't there for the one person who needed her most? The next morning, she woke up early, determined to change things. She sent an email to her boss, asking if she could leave the office early that day. She needed time. Time to reconnect with Marcus, to be the mom she knew she could be. And so, she took Marcus to his soccer game. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about work, about deadlines, or presentations. She was just there, cheering him on from the sidelines, her heart full of gratitude for this small, yet precious moment. When the game was over, Marcus ran over to her, his face lit up with excitement. "Mom, I scored a goal," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with pride. Jasmine's heart swelled with love as she pulled him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never miss another game, I promise." In that moment, Jasmine realized that she couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep sacrificing her personal life for her career. She had to find a way to balance it all. Because in the end, it wasn't the job or the accolades that would matter. It was the people she loved, the moments she shared with them. And she was determined to make sure she didn't miss any more of those moments. The morning was quiet, a rare calm before the storm. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, sipping on her coffee, staring at the email on her phone. It was from her boss, Mr. Thompson. "Jasmine, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to personally invite you to a meeting tomorrow regarding a potential project that I believe you'd be perfect for." Please let me know if you're available at 9 a.m. We're eager to discuss the details with you. Looking forward to hearing from you. Regards, Mr. Thompson." Her heart skipped a beat. A potential project? Jasmine had been working hard, but this felt different. The tone of the email suggested something big was on the horizon, something that could make a major impact on her career. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to prove herself in ways she hadn't imagined. But as the excitement bubbled up inside her, so did a rising sense of unease. 9 a.m. tomorrow. That meant she would have to leave the office early, possibly before Marcus had left for school. The thought made her stomach turn. She had been struggling to balance her work and motherhood as it was, and now, it seemed like every new opportunity was pulling her away from the one person who needed her most. Jasmine glanced at the clock. She still had time to think it over, but she couldn't deny the pull of ambition, the desire to succeed, to show herself and everyone else that she was capable of more than just holding the fort. She had the skills, the drive, the vision, but at what cost? Her phone buzzed again, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Marcus. "Mom, can we go to the park after school? I haven't seen you all week." Jasmine's chest tightened. She had promised him that they would spend time together this weekend. The soccer game had been a small victory, but she knew it wasn't enough. He needed more from her, and she couldn't keep letting him down. Still, she couldn't ignore the weight of the opportunity sitting in her inbox. If she said no, would she be turning down the chance to make a real impact in her career? What if this was the project that led to her promotion, the recognition she had been working so hard for? Could she risk that? The conflict inside her was overwhelming. She had always been the one to put others first, especially Marcus. But now, it seemed like her future was hanging in the balance. She couldn't ignore the path that was opening up before her. After a long pause, Jasmine finally responded to her boss. "I'll be there at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Looking forward to it." As soon as she hit send, a knot formed in her stomach. The decision had been made, but it didn't feel right. The next morning, Jasmine was up early, preparing herself for the meeting. She dressed in her sharpest business attire, made sure her presentation materials were in order, and packed everything into her briefcase. But as she got ready to leave, a small voice inside her questioned whether she was making a mistake. She kissed Marcus on the cheek, who was still asleep, unaware of the battle she was fighting. It wasn't just about career progression anymore. It was about finding a way to feel whole, to feel like she was doing what was best for everyone, including herself. The drive to the office was filled with a sense of dread, mixed with anticipation. As Jasmine walked into the conference room, she could see Mr. Thompson, along with a few other senior executives. They greeted her warmly, their faces professional, but with a hint of excitement. They were all eager to discuss the future of the company, but Jasmine knew that this conversation was about more than just business. This was about her future. "Jasmine, we've been impressed with your work," Mr. Thompson began, his tone serious. "We've been developing a new initiative in the renewable energy sector, and we think you could be the one to lead it. You've shown incredible potential, and this project could be a major step forward for both you and the company." Jasmine's pulse quickened. Lead the initiative? She had been hoping for an opportunity like this, but now that it was here, she felt a mix of excitement and terror. "This project will require long hours, strategic thinking, and significant leadership," Mr. Thompson continued. "We believe you're the right person for the job, but we also know it will take a lot of your time, and it will be a challenge." Jasmine nodded, trying to absorb the weight of what they were asking. Long hours. She had already been putting in long hours. Could she handle more? Could she keep balancing everything? Or would something have to give? "Thank you for considering me," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling inside her. "I'm honored. I'm ready to take on the challenge." The meeting concluded with details about the project, deadlines, and expectations. But Jasmine's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, about her promise to him, about her constant struggle to be the kind of mother she knew she could be. As she left the office that afternoon, her phone buzzed again. It was Marcus, a simple message that made her heart sink. "Mom, you weren't at my soccer game again." She sighed deeply, her emotions tangled in a mess of guilt and doubt. Was she making the right choice? Or was she sacrificing the one thing that mattered most, her relationship with her son, for something that, in the end, might not bring her the happiness she thought it would? Jasmine knew she couldn't keep living like this. But for now, the project was her focus. She had made her decision, and she would live with the consequences. But she had to find a way to make it work. For herself, for Marcus, for everyone. The days after the meeting seemed to blur together for Jasmine. She threw herself into the renewable energy project with a determination that surprised even her. Early mornings turned into late nights, and she found herself making sacrifices at every turn. The excitement of the new role kept her focused, but as the weeks passed, the guilt continued to grow. Marcus had stopped asking about soccer games. He stopped sending her texts asking for a trip to the park, or simply wanting to spend time together. Jasmine tried to tell herself that it was just part of growing up, that Marcus was becoming more independent, but deep down, she knew better. He was withdrawing from her, and no matter how much she threw herself into the work that was now her life, it felt like someone, was slipping away. One night, as Jasmine sat in her apartment, going over the latest numbers for the project, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister, Tanya. "Hey, have you talked to Marcus lately? I'm starting to get worried about him. He seems distant. Just thought you should know." Jasmine's stomach twisted. Distant. The word echoed in her mind like a bell tolling in the silence of her thoughts. She had noticed it too. Marcus didn't talk to her the way he used to. He didn't look for her approval the way he once did when he showed off his schoolwork or told her about his day. She felt the distance growing with each passing day, and now her sister was noticing it too. Jasmine quickly typed a reply. "I've been really busy with work, Tanya. I'll try to make more time for him. I promise." But even as she sent the message, she knew that trying wasn't enough. Her promises had become empty words. She hadn't made the time, and no amount of texting or quick phone calls could fill the growing gap between them. The next day, Jasmine arrived at work early, as usual, and immediately dove into the project's financials. She barely looked up when her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Tanya. "You should talk to him. It's getting worse. He's been quiet. Doesn't even want to hang out with me anymore. I think he's starting to think you don't care." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about missing soccer games anymore. It was about Marcus feeling like she didn't care. That wasn't something Jasmine was willing to accept, but she didn't know how to fix it, how to repair the damage she had done. Her focus on her career had consumed her, and now it was starting to feel like her world was falling apart. At lunch, Jasmine decided to take a break from the overwhelming numbers and call Marcus. It rang twice before he answered, his voice sounding flat. "Hey, Mom," he said, the usual warmth in his tone absent. "Hey, Marcus. How's your day going?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but the tension in her voice was undeniable. "It's fine," he replied. "I'm good." Jasmine winced. "I'm good." It wasn't the response she had been hoping for. She could feel the wall he was building between them, one brick at a time. "I miss you," she said quietly, hoping he could hear the sincerity in her voice. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Jasmine held her breath, waiting for him to say something, anything. But when he finally spoke, his words were simple and to the point. "I'm fine, Mom. I've got to go. Bye." The call ended before Jasmine could say another word. Her heart sank as she stared at the phone screen. It wasn't just that Marcus didn't need her right now. It was that he didn't want her. He didn't want her attention, didn't want her in his life as much anymore. And she had no one to blame but herself. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and presentations, but Jasmine couldn't focus. Every time she tried to go over the next step in her project, her mind kept drifting back to Marcus and the empty space between them. The project was important, yes, but no amount of professional success could fill the void in her heart. That evening, she drove home with a heavy heart, determined to try and make things right. As she walked through the door, she was greeted by silence. The apartment felt different, emptier somehow, as if the walls themselves were echoing the distance she had created. She went to Marcus's room, where he was sitting at his desk, headphones in, staring at his phone. He didn't even look up when she entered. "Marcus," she said softly, "can we talk?" He pulled out his headphones and turned in his chair, his expression unreadable. "What's up?" he asked, his voice indifferent. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, struggling to find the right words. "And I know I haven't been there for you lately. I've been focused on work, and I shouldn't have let that get in the way of being a mom. I'm sorry, Marcus. I promise I'll do better. I want you to know that I love you, and I'm here for you, no matter what." For a moment, there was silence. Jasmine waited, her heart pounding, unsure of what would come next. Finally, Marcus spoke. "It's not just about that, Mom," he said quietly. "It's about you not being here when I need you. You're always working, always busy, and I'm starting to think you don't care." Jasmine felt the sting of his words, but they were the truth. She had neglected him, and it had hurt him more than she had realized. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant to make you feel that way." Marcus looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "I know you're trying, but it feels like you don't have time for me anymore. I just want you to be here, to really be here." Jasmine sat down beside him, wrapping her arm around him. "I'll be here, Marcus. I promise. I'll make the time. You're my priority, always." And for the first time in weeks, Jasmine felt a small spark of hope. It wasn't too late to rebuild their relationship, but she would have to make some tough decisions to find a balance that worked for both of them. It wouldn't be easy, but for Marcus, it was worth it. The following days after that conversation with Marcus felt like a shift, a change Jasmine hadn't expected. For the first time in weeks, she found herself looking forward to her evenings, eager to spend real time with her son, not just the brief moments of distraction she had been settling for. She started taking a step back from the relentless drive of her project, trying to rediscover what really mattered. Marcus had been quieter since their talk, but she could tell that the walls between them were starting to come down, little by little. That evening, after a long day at work, Jasmine decided to try something different. She turned off her phone and headed straight to the kitchen, determined to cook dinner for Marcus, just the two of them, with no distractions. When Marcus walked into the kitchen, he raised an eyebrow. "Dinner?" he asked, his voice still laced with skepticism. "This is new." Jasmine smiled, trying to mask the nervousness she felt. "Yeah, I figured we could try something different tonight. No work, no distractions. Just us." They spent the next hour together, cooking and talking. It wasn't the deep conversation she had hoped for, but it was a start. Marcus asked about her project, something he hadn't done in a while, and she told him about the challenges and the exciting developments. She made sure to keep the tone light, focusing on the positive. For once, it felt like they were connecting again, even if it was just in small ways. As they sat down to eat, Marcus picked up his fork but then paused. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Jasmine set her own fork down, immediately giving him her full attention. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Are you going to be here more? Like, not just physically, but like, actually here?" The question hit Jasmine hard, but it was the one she had been dreading. She realized that, despite their progress, there was still so much work to be done. She wasn't going to fix everything overnight. "I'm going to try, Marcus," she said softly. "I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry. I promise I'm going to be here. More than just physically. I'll make sure you feel like I'm really here for you." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. But then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay, I miss you, Mom. That's all." "I miss you too," Jasmine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise, I'm going to make this right." After dinner, they sat on the couch together and watched a movie, an old favorite of Marcus's that they had both watched 100 times. The comfort of being together in that moment was a balm to Jasmine's heart. It wasn't perfect. They still had a long way to go, but she felt like they were finally on the same page, rebuilding the trust that had been damaged. The next few days, Jasmine made a conscious effort to be more present. She started leaving her work at the office, not checking emails late into the night, and carving out time for Marcus. She joined him for his soccer practice, even though she had 1,000 things running through her head about the project. She watched movies with him, even if she was exhausted. Slowly but surely, Marcus began to open up again, talking to her more, asking her about her day, and sharing his own experiences at school. But the real test came one weekend when Marcus asked if they could go to the park, something they hadn't done in a long time. Jasmine immediately agreed, grateful for the opportunity to make up for lost time. They spent the afternoon walking around the park, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus even convinced her to join in a game of soccer with him, something she never thought she'd enjoy. But there, running across the grass, laughing, and kicking a soccer ball with her son, Jasmine felt something shift within herself. It was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. Peace. It wasn't about work or her career or anything else. It was about this moment, about the relationship she was rebuilding with Marcus, one step at a time. Later, as they sat on a bench by the playground, Marcus turned to her with a smile. "Thanks for today, Mom. I really like it when you're here with me." Jasmine's heart swelled. "I'm here, Marcus. I'm always going to be here." It was a simple moment, but it meant everything to her. She knew she wasn't perfect, and she knew that balancing work and motherhood was never going to be easy. But in that moment, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. As they walked back to the car, Jasmine made a silent promise to herself. She was going to make this work, no matter what. Her career was important, but Marcus was her priority. It was time for her to prove that she could have both, success and family, and that neither would have to suffer because of the other. Jasmine was starting to feel the pressure again. It had been a few weeks since she began making more time for Marcus. She had adjusted her schedule, set clearer boundaries at work, and even made an effort to attend every soccer practice, every game. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finding balance. But as the days passed, something was shifting on the professional front. The renewable energy project she had thrown herself into was reaching its final stages, and the pressure to succeed was mounting. Her team had been working tirelessly, and Jasmine was at the forefront, managing both the financials and the strategic decisions. It was exhilarating, but it was also exhausting. She had worked for years to get to this point, and now that success was within her grasp, she couldn't afford to let it slip away. Yet, with every late-night meeting and every phone call from her colleagues, Jasmine began to feel a familiar tension rising within her. Her work was starting to feel all-consuming again. She was spending less time with Marcus and missing the moments that had become so precious. She knew she couldn't keep going like this, but each day, it felt like the stakes were higher. One Monday morning, Jasmine walked into the office, prepared to tackle the next phase of the project. She greeted her team and settled into her office, ready to dive into the financials. But before she could even open her laptop, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus's school. She opened it quickly, her heart sinking as she read the words. "Dear Jasmine, we regret to inform you that Marcus has been involved in an incident today. Please contact the school as soon as possible for more details." Her mind immediately raced, and panic flooded her chest. Marcus? What had happened? She quickly called the school, her hands shaking as she waited for someone to pick up. "Hello, Jasmine?" The voice on the other end was calm but firm. It was Mrs. Walker, the school counselor. "There's been a situation with Marcus. He's fine physically, but we need you to come in as soon as possible to discuss it." "Of course, I'll be there right away," Jasmine replied, her voice tight with worry. She grabbed her bag, rushed out of the office, and headed straight for the school. The traffic seemed to stretch on forever, every passing second a reminder that she wasn't there for her son when he needed her the most. When she arrived at the school, she was immediately escorted to the principal's office. Marcus sat there, his head lowered, his arms folded across his chest. His face was pale, and his usual energy was absent. Jasmine's heart twisted as she sat beside him. "What happened, Marcus?" she asked gently, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus didn't look up. "I got into a fight, Mom," he said quietly. "A boy at school was making fun of me, and I lost it. I don't know what happened. I just couldn't stop." Jasmine's stomach dropped. Her first instinct was to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but she knew she couldn't brush this off. "What did you do after?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told the teacher, and she sent me to the principal," Marcus replied, still not meeting her eyes. Jasmine turned to Mrs. Walker, who had been standing by, watching the exchange. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, hoping for some reassurance. Mrs. Walker nodded. Marcus is not in any trouble, but this is a sign that something's been bothering him for a while. We're concerned about his emotional well-being. He's been withdrawn lately, and it seems like this was the tipping point. Jasmine felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She knew the signs, had seen them before. Marcus wasn't the type to lash out without a reason. She had been so caught up in her work that she hadn't seen how much he was struggling. Mrs. Walker continued, "We recommend that you both work with a counselor to address what's been going on. It might help Marcus process his emotions and give him a space to talk about what's been weighing on him." Jasmine nodded, her mind spinning. She wanted to say all the right things, to promise her son that everything would be fine. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. She had failed him. She had been so focused on the future, on her career, that she had neglected the present, the very person who needed her most. As they left the school, Jasmine put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, but he didn't respond. The drive home was silent, the tension between them thick with unspoken words. Jasmine was struggling to find the right thing to say, but nothing seemed to be enough. When they arrived home, Marcus went straight to his room without a word. Jasmine stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the closed door, the weight of everything she had been avoiding finally crashing down on her. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table, going over the numbers for her project once again, Jasmine realized something. The project, the career she had worked so hard for, had become a symbol of everything she had been neglecting. She couldn't keep ignoring the cracks in her relationship with Marcus. It wasn't just about missing soccer games or late-night talks. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed by a few changes or a promise. It was about being present, about showing up for him, even when it was hard. Jasmine made a decision that night. She would take a step back from the project, at least for a little while, and focus on what truly mattered, her son. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she couldn't keep running from the consequences of her divided attention. Tomorrow, she would make the call. She would find a counselor for Marcus, and they would start the process of healing together. She would be there for him, no matter what. But as she put her phone down, she couldn't help but wonder if it was too little, too late. The next morning, Jasmine woke up early, her mind already filled with plans. She had spent the night mulling over the conversation at the school, the weight of it pressing on her chest like a constant reminder of how much she had been missing. Today, things would change. She had always been someone who approached problems head-on, and this was no different. She needed to fix things with Marcus. But she also realized that she couldn't just throw herself into this new task without considering how to juggle it with the demands of her work. Something had to give, and for the first time, Jasmine knew it had to be her work. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand, she drafted a plan. She would call the counselor's office first thing to set up an appointment for Marcus. She would make sure he had all the support he needed, even if it meant rearranging her schedule to be there. For the first time, Jasmine felt the stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. She reached for her phone and made the call to the school counselor's office. After a brief conversation, they scheduled an appointment for Marcus that afternoon. Jasmine breathed a sigh of relief. At least one thing was moving forward. But as she hung up the phone, she felt a nagging sense of guilt. This was the first step, but it wasn't enough. Marcus needed more than therapy appointments. He needed her. She realized that she had been so focused on fixing things that she hadn't truly connected with him. She had promised herself she would do better, but now she needed to prove it. Later that afternoon, when Marcus came home from school, he was quieter than usual. Jasmine took a deep breath and walked up to his room, knocking softly before entering. "Hey, bud," she said gently, sitting down on the edge of his bed. "How's your day?" He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. It was fine. Jasmine could tell he was still processing what had happened. She sat there for a moment, unsure of how to approach him, but then she decided to simply speak from her heart. "I'm really sorry, Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been so focused on my work lately that I haven't been there for you like I should be. I can't undo the past, but I'm going to do everything I can to be here for you now." Marcus looked at her then, his eyes still holding that lingering hurt. "I just want you to be around more," he said quietly. "I miss you." Jasmine's heart clenched. "I know, buddy. I know." And I'm so sorry for that. But I promise you, I'm going to be here more. I'm going to make sure of it. The words felt like a start, but Jasmine knew they wouldn't be enough if she didn't follow through. That was the hardest part, the knowing that making up for lost time wouldn't be an overnight fix. But she was committed. Later that evening, after Marcus had settled in for the night, Jasmine sat at her desk, staring at her work laptop. The numbers, the reports, the emails, they all felt like they were screaming for attention. But Jasmine couldn't ignore the tug in her chest. Her son needed her, and for the first time in a long time, she realized that her personal life had to take priority over her professional one. She pulled up the project's current status on her laptop and reviewed it. There were a few urgent items that required her attention, but nothing so critical that it couldn't wait for a day or two. She made a decision. She would delegate some of her responsibilities. She would take a short break from her leadership role to focus on Marcus, knowing that doing so would only strengthen her ability to manage both her work and home life in the long run. She sent a message to her team, outlining her decision. I'll be stepping back a bit from my day-to-day involvement this week to focus on family matters, she wrote. I trust you all to keep things moving forward. Please reach out if anything urgent comes up. I'll be checking in periodically, but I need to prioritize my son right now. It wasn't an easy message to send, and she knew her decision might raise eyebrows. But Jasmine felt an immense sense of relief. This was the right choice. That afternoon, she drove Marcus to his therapy appointment. They arrived early, and for the first time in a long while, Jasmine noticed how much she missed the simple act of just being with him. They didn't talk much during the drive, but when they arrived at the office, Marcus smiled at her, the tiniest flicker of relief in his eyes. I'm glad you're here, Mom, he said softly. Jasmine's heart warmed. I'm always going to be here, Marcus. Always. The session lasted an hour, and when it was over, the therapist pulled Jasmine aside. Marcus is showing signs of emotional distress, but he's opening up, she said. This is a good first step. I think it would help if you could continue being involved in these sessions. Jasmine agreed immediately. Of course. I'll make sure we're here every week. As they drove home, Jasmine couldn't help but feel hopeful. It was just the beginning, but it was a start. She had taken control of her priorities, and she was learning to let go of the guilt and the need to be perfect. Marcus needed her now, and she was finally ready to be the mother he deserved. Jasmine had managed to carve out a new routine, one that allowed her to keep her work on track while also being present for Marcus. The first few days had been difficult, balancing meetings and deadlines with counseling sessions and after-school activities. But with each passing day, she felt like she was gaining more control over her life. The decision to step back from her leadership role temporarily had been a hard one, but it had given her the breathing room she needed. She delegated the bulk of her responsibilities to her trusted team members, checked in when necessary, and was no longer overwhelmed by constant emails and phone calls. It felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. As the week progressed, Marcus seemed more at ease. His mood had lightened, and he was starting to open up more, both to her and to his therapist. Jasmine could see the subtle changes in him. The smile that seemed a little brighter, the conversations that felt a little longer. They even spent a Saturday afternoon playing video games together, something they hadn't done in months. But despite the improvements in their relationship, Jasmine couldn't ignore the reality that her work was still there, waiting. And the longer she stayed away from the project, the more the pressure began to build. Her team was doing well, but Jasmine knew that the final phase of the renewable energy project was approaching, and it would require her full attention. On Thursday morning, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from her project manager, Mark. Jasmine, I need to discuss some upcoming decisions about the funding for the final phase. Can you set aside time for a meeting today? Jasmine sighed. The timing couldn't have been worse. She had planned to spend the day with Marcus, taking him to the park and grabbing lunch. They had both been looking forward to it, but the reality was that this project was crucial for her career. If she dropped the ball now, it could affect everything she'd worked for. She sat for a moment, debating the best course of action. She had to find a way to manage both. With her hand on the phone, she glanced over at Marcus, who was sitting at the kitchen table, eating his cereal. He was calm, content, but Jasmine knew that she couldn't continue to put her work on the back burner forever. I'll be right back, she said to Marcus, trying to sound as casual as possible. I need to make a quick call for work. Go ahead and finish your breakfast, okay? Marcus nodded without a word, but Jasmine noticed the slight hesitation in his eyes. She gave him a quick smile before stepping into her home office. After locking the door behind her, she took a deep breath and dialed Mark's number. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Jasmine. Thanks for getting back to me so quickly," Mark said. "I know you've been dealing with some personal stuff, but we really need your input on these funding decisions. We can't move forward without your approval." "I know, Mark," Jasmine said, her voice firm but understanding. "I've just been trying to find some balance with my son, but I'll be there. What time do you need me?" Mark hesitated for a second. "How about 2 o'clock? We'll have the full proposal ready by then." "I'll make it work," Jasmine replied. After ending the call, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, letting out a long breath. The truth was, she was already starting to feel the old pressure creeping back in. Work was pulling her back in, just as it had always done. But this time, she wasn't about to let it control her. She had come too far. She stood up and walked back into the kitchen, where Marcus was finishing his breakfast. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, she felt the weight of his gaze. "I need to take a work call later today," she told him, keeping her voice as gentle as possible. "But we'll still go to the park afterward, okay?" Marcus didn't say anything at first, but Jasmine could see the sadness in his eyes. "You promise?" he asked, his voice small. "I promise," she said, sitting down beside him. "I'll make sure we have time for us. But I need to do this so that I can keep providing for us." "I'm doing this for both of us, Marcus." He nodded, though his eyes still seemed uncertain. Jasmine could feel his lingering doubt, but she knew she couldn't make this right in one conversation. She would show him, with her actions, that she could find a way to balance everything. By 2:00, Jasmine was back in her office, going over the proposal that Mark had sent her. As she read through the documents, she realized how much had changed in her own perspective. Just a few weeks ago, this project would have consumed her, leaving her no time for anything else. Now, as she looked at the numbers and projections, she found herself weighing them with a different set of priorities in mind. The meeting went smoothly, and the team made some final adjustments to the funding plan. But as the meeting ended and she hung up the phone, Jasmine felt a sense of relief. She had done her part, and now she could leave it in capable hands. Without wasting any time, she called Marcus. "Hey, buddy, it's all done. Let's go to the park. Just you and me." The excitement in his voice was immediate. "Really, Mom? You mean it?" "Of course," Jasmine replied, smiling to herself. "Let's go." The drive to the park was full of light-hearted conversation. For the first time in weeks, Jasmine felt truly present. She wasn't thinking about the deadlines or the project. She was focused on Marcus, on their time together. As they arrived at the park and got out of the car, Jasmine looked over at her son, his face lit up with a smile. This moment, right here, was what truly mattered. She had struck the balance, and it felt good. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, work emails, and quality time with Marcus. For the first time in months, Jasmine felt like she was truly managing to balance her responsibilities. The guilt that had haunted her for so long, guilt over not being there for Marcus, had started to fade. She was present, supportive, and involved in his life. And in turn, Marcus was becoming more engaged with his schoolwork and his therapy sessions. It was progress, slow but steady, and that was enough. But life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. It was a Tuesday morning when Jasmine's phone buzzed with an email notification that made her stomach drop. She glanced at the screen and saw the subject line, "Urgent, Funding Review and Project Delays." Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked open the email. The message was from Mark, her project manager, and it contained news that sent a chill through her. "Jasmine, there have been significant issues with the investor funding for the final phase of the renewable energy project. We've encountered delays in approval, and the timeline we set has been pushed back. I need to discuss this with you ASAP. Can you hop on a call as soon as possible?" Jasmine's mind raced. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a major hurdle. She had worked tirelessly to get the funding secured for the final phase, and now, everything seemed to be unraveling. If the project got delayed, it could mean missing critical deadlines, and that would jeopardize the entire initiative. She quickly replied to Mark, confirming a time for the call. Her thoughts were scattered, and as she sat in her office, staring at the email, a sinking feeling began to settle in her chest. The stress that had been lurking in the background for so long now felt undeniable. She glanced at the clock. It was time for the call. As the phone rang, Jasmine's thoughts were elsewhere. She had become so accustomed to controlling every detail of the project that the idea of things slipping out of her grasp was terrifying. The conversation with Mark would give her more details, but right now, all she could think about was how to fix this. "Hey, Jasmine," Mark's voice came through the phone, sounding as tense as she felt. "We've hit a snag with the funding partners. They're saying there are concerns about market volatility, and they're requesting more time to review everything. The delay could set us back weeks, and we may lose our window to launch the final phase on time." Jasmine closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. How much of a delay are we talking about? At least a month, possibly more. The worst-case scenario is that we won't be able to secure the necessary funding at all. Jasmine's stomach turned. A delay like that would be catastrophic. The entire project had been months in the making, and now, everything was at risk. "I understand," she said, though her voice felt hollow. "What's the next step?" Mark sighed. "We need to go back to the investors and try to convince them that we're still on track. If we don't show them results soon, they might pull out entirely. We need to hit a few key benchmarks to keep them interested. And that means we need your full attention on this, Jasmine. We can't afford for you to step back now." Jasmine felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. She had promised Marcus that she would be there for him, that she would prioritize their time together. But this project, this career, was her livelihood. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, just when things were starting to settle, the weight of the responsibility threatened to crush her. "I'll do what I can," Jasmine said, her voice thick with determination. "But I need to make sure Marcus is okay. He's been through a lot, and I can't just abandon him now." "I understand," Mark said, his tone softening. "But Jasmine, if we don't fix this now, all of your efforts could be for nothing. You know that." The weight of his words hung in the air. Jasmine was torn between her commitment to Marcus and her professional obligations. Both felt equally important, and yet, she knew she couldn't give everything to both without sacrificing something else. "I'll be in touch with the team," she said, ending the call. She sat in her office for several minutes, the silence around her heavy and oppressive. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about her career. It was about her family, her future, and everything she had worked to build. She glanced over at the family picture on her desk, the one that showed her, Marcus, and her late husband smiling on a beach vacation. That picture had always been a reminder of the love and happiness they shared. But now, it was a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had lost. "I can't lose this," she whispered to herself. "I can't." Later that afternoon, Jasmine sat down with Marcus, who had just finished his homework. She noticed a shift in his demeanor. He was quieter than usual, his shoulders slightly slumped as he sat across from her. "Everything okay, bud?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Marcus looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Yeah, just a lot of stuff going on." Jasmine sighed, knowing exactly what he meant. He hadn't said anything about it, but she could tell that the changes in their routine were weighing on him. "I know, honey," she said softly. "I've been really busy with work lately, and I've had to spend a lot of time away. But I want you to know that I'm here. I haven't forgotten about you." Marcus met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want you to go away again. I need you." Jasmine's heart tightened. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I won't go anywhere, Marcus. I promise. We'll get through this together." But even as she said the words, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. The project was in trouble, and it was only a matter of time before everything would come to a head. She needed to find a way to make it work, for both Marcus and the project, but how? She didn't know yet, but she was determined to figure it out. Jasmine was no stranger to pressure. She had lived through the ups and downs of the corporate world long enough to know how to keep her composure under stress. But lately, the stress had taken on a different form, one that was harder to manage. The personal and professional worlds she had always kept separate were now colliding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Every day felt like a balancing act, and she was terrified of falling. The news about the project delays had hit her hard, and no matter how much she tried to focus on Marcus, it was impossible to ignore the urgency of the situation. She had to act fast. There was no more time to waste. The project's success was tied directly to her ability to navigate these turbulent waters, and if she failed, everything she had worked for could crumble. But the more Jasmine tried to focus on work, the more she felt like she was losing touch with Marcus. He had become quieter in the past few days, his usual chatter replaced by long silences. He didn't ask for much, but the way he clung to her every time they were together spoke volumes. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of being left behind. And in a way, Jasmine was afraid too. She had promised herself she wouldn't sacrifice Marcus again for the sake of her career. But the weight of the decisions she was facing now felt impossible to ignore. That night, after she put Marcus to bed, Jasmine sat alone in her office, staring at her laptop screen. Her email inbox was filled with messages about the funding delay and urgent requests from the project team. She clicked through each one, reading with little focus. Nothing seemed to help. She rubbed her eyes, trying to stave off the headache that was starting to form. The glow of the screen illuminated her face in the otherwise dark room, but she felt a sense of emptiness creep in. What was the point of all of this if she was losing the one thing that truly mattered? A soft knock on the door broke her concentration. It was Marcus. His face was barely visible in the dim light from the hallway, but Jasmine could see the outline of his small frame standing in the doorway. "Mom." His voice trembled, his usual confidence replaced by something fragile. "Can I talk to you?" Jasmine's heart clenched. She quickly minimized her screen and motioned for him to come in. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Marcus shuffled into the room, his pajama bottoms swishing against the floor. He climbed up onto the couch beside her, his eyes downcast. I don't feel like we talk anymore," he said quietly, his words breaking her heart. "You're always working, and when you're home, you're not really here. I miss you, Mom." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words hitting her like a punch in the stomach. She had been so focused on trying to fix everything for both of them, she had forgotten the one thing that mattered most, actually being there for him. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to make you feel like that. I've been so caught up in everything, but you're right. I haven't been the mom you need." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes wide with vulnerability. "Are we okay, Mom?" Jasmine wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. For a moment, she let herself forget about the project, the pressure, the deadlines. It was just her and Marcus, in this moment of quiet understanding. "We're okay, buddy," she said softly, her voice trembling. "We'll always be okay. I promise." The next morning, Jasmine made a decision. She would no longer allow work to dictate every aspect of her life. The project was important, yes, but not at the cost of her relationship with Marcus. She had to find a way to give him the attention he needed while still fulfilling her professional obligations. That day, she called Mark and told him she needed to take a step back from some of the day-to-day responsibilities. She would still be involved, but she couldn't continue to pour herself into the project at the expense of her son. The look of concern in Mark's voice was clear as he tried to argue, but Jasmine stood firm. "I'm doing what's best for both of us, Mark," she said. "If I keep pushing myself too hard, I won't be any good to anyone. I'll be available for strategic decisions, but I need to be there for Marcus too." She ended the call and let out a long breath. It felt like a weight had been lifted. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was the right choice. Later that afternoon, Marcus bounded into the room, holding his favorite board game. "Mom, do you want to play with me?" he asked, his face brightening at the idea. Jasmine smiled, a sense of peace filling her chest. "I'd love to. Let's make it our game time, okay?" As they sat down to play, Jasmine realized that this was exactly what she needed. No emails, no calls, just her and Marcus, creating memories that mattered more than anything else. She could handle the challenges at work, but her son came first. And for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt like she had finally found her balance. The week following Jasmine's decision to scale back at work was one of the most peaceful she had experienced in months. It felt like a breath of fresh air after holding her breath for so long. Her evenings with Marcus were filled with games, laughter, and moments of quiet connection that reminded her why she'd started this journey in the first place. At work, things were still in flux. Mark had reluctantly agreed to her request to step back, though he expressed his concerns about how it would affect the project. Jasmine had made it clear that she wasn't walking away entirely. She'd remain involved in key decisions, but she needed space to be present for her son. The balance wasn't easy, but it was something she was learning to manage, one day at a time. That Thursday afternoon, Jasmine decided to do something she hadn't done in a while: take a break. She left her office early, picked up Marcus from school, and took him to a local park. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass, and there was a crispness in the air that signaled the changing seasons. It felt like a perfect moment, one where the pressures of life could be put aside, even just for a little while. They sat on a bench together, eating ice cream and watching the children play in the distance. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jasmine allowed herself to relax. She watched as Marcus laughed, his worries momentarily forgotten as he tossed a frisbee with some of the other kids. She could see the joy in his face, and it was a reminder of just how much he needed her, and how much she needed him, too. "Mom," Marcus said between bites of ice cream, "can we come back here every week?" Jasmine smiled, the stress of the past few weeks melting away in the warmth of his simple request. "We can do that, bud. How about every Thursday? We'll make it our day." Marcus grinned widely, his eyes shining with happiness. "Yes, I love that idea." Jasmine leaned back on the bench, her mind at ease for the first time in weeks. She had made the right choice. There was always work to be done, always deadlines to meet, but none of it mattered if she wasn't there for Marcus when he needed her the most. This was the time to build memories, to be present in his life, and to show him that family always came first. The next morning, Jasmine returned to her office with a renewed sense of purpose. The calls and emails from the previous days had been piling up, and as she glanced at her inbox, she realized just how much work still lay ahead. But she was different now. She wasn't going to let herself get swallowed by it again. She picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. "Jasmine," he answered quickly, his voice strained. "I need to talk to you about the latest update on the project. We've got another issue." Jasmine's stomach tightened. The calm she had felt just hours ago seemed distant now, replaced by the ever-present pressure of the project's looming problems. She steeled herself for what was coming. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's the investors," Mark explained. "They're still hesitant about moving forward with the funding. They want more reassurances that the final phase is worth the risk, and they're asking for another round of projections. If we don't show them something solid by the end of next week, we're in danger of losing the whole thing." Jasmine's mind raced. Another setback, another obstacle. Just when she thought things were stabilizing, the ground beneath her feet shifted again. But she couldn't let herself be consumed by the anxiety of it. She had a plan. She had Marcus. And no matter how difficult things got, she would find a way to manage both. "I'll get the team together and prepare the projections," Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll have something for them by the deadline." Mark hesitated, and she could hear the concern in his voice. "Jasmine, are you sure you're up for this? I know you've been balancing a lot lately, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed." Jasmine paused, feeling the weight of his words. She had been overwhelmed, but she wasn't anymore. She had learned to prioritize. She had learned to ask for help, and this time, she wasn't alone. She had a team. She had Marcus. She had everything she needed to make it through. "I'm ready, Mark," she replied. "Let's get this done." That afternoon, Jasmine called an emergency meeting with the project team. As she sat at the head of the table, she could feel the pressure of the investors' demands hanging over her. But she also felt a sense of clarity. This was just another challenge to overcome, another puzzle to solve. "We need to show them why this phase of the project matters," Jasmine said, looking around the room at her team. "We need projections that prove we're still on track, that the risks are manageable, and that the rewards are worth it. We can't afford to fail." The team nodded in agreement, and Jasmine could sense a shift in the room. Everyone was in it together, working toward the same goal. She wasn't just the leader anymore. She was part of a team. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't carrying the burden alone. After the meeting, Jasmine reached out to Mark, updating him on their plan and assuring him that the team was committed to meeting the deadline. As she sat back in her chair, exhausted but determined, she realized something important. She was no longer allowing work to take over her life. She was balancing both sides of her world, and it was possible. It wasn't going to be easy, but she had the strength to keep going. That evening, Marcus came running into the room, his face flushed from the excitement of the day. "Mom," he said breathlessly, "guess what? I made the winning shot at soccer practice." Jasmine's heart swelled with pride as she knelt down to hug him. "That's amazing, Marcus. I'm so proud of you. Are you still going to come to my game tomorrow?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Jasmine smiled. "Of course I will. I wouldn't miss it for the world." For the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt like everything was finally aligning. She was present for Marcus, doing her best at work, and no longer letting the stress consume her. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she knew that with balance and determination, she could handle anything that came her way. The weeks passed quickly, and for Jasmine, life seemed to settle into a rhythm that balanced the challenges of work and family. She had adjusted her schedule to ensure that Marcus always had her full attention when he needed it, and she had managed to pull the project back on track. The team was working seamlessly, and with the latest round of projections, the investors seemed satisfied, for now. But with each passing day, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming, something she couldn't quite see but could feel in the pit of her stomach. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now, her instincts were telling her that a storm was coming. That Friday afternoon, she got the call. She was sitting in her office, reviewing the final draft of the project proposal, when her phone buzzed. It was Mark. Her stomach flipped. "Jasmine," Mark's voice crackled through the speaker, "we need to talk. The investors want a face-to-face meeting. They're not convinced that the risk is worth the reward. We've got one more shot to change their minds." Jasmine's heart raced. This was the moment she had been dreading, the final push, the one where everything could either come crashing down or come together. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow," Mark replied. "They want to see you in person. They're asking for detailed financials, projections, and any other data that can help convince them to move forward. We need to be prepared, or this could be the end of everything." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, prayed, that the worst was behind her. But the reality of the situation was setting in. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. The success of the project, her future at the company, and, ultimately, the direction her life would take. "I'll be there," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I'll get the team to finalize everything tonight." That evening, Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, a stack of reports and financial sheets spread out in front of her. The numbers blurred together as she tried to focus on the task at hand. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept drifting. She thought about Marcus, how he had been so proud of her when she agreed to scale back at work. He had been counting on her, and the last thing she wanted was to disappoint him again. As the hours passed, Jasmine's exhaustion began to weigh on her. She hadn't felt this drained in a long time, but she couldn't afford to stop now. There was too much at stake. This wasn't just about the project. It was about proving to herself that she could balance her personal life and career without sacrificing either. By the time Marcus came to find her, she had barely noticed the clock ticking past midnight. "Mom." His voice was soft, and when Jasmine looked up, she saw him standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Why are you still working?" Jasmine's heart squeezed as she saw the concern in his eyes. She closed the laptop and stood up, walking over to him. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she said, crouching down to his level. "I'm just finishing up something really important. I know I've been working a lot lately." Marcus nodded but didn't speak. Instead, he wrapped his little arms around her, holding on tightly. Jasmine hugged him back, closing her eyes for a moment and allowing herself to breathe him in. This was what truly mattered, the love, the connection, the quiet moments that made everything worthwhile. "Do you want me to stay in here with you, Mom?" Marcus asked, his voice small. I don't want you to be lonely. Jasmine smiled, her throat tightening. No, sweetheart, I'm okay. But thank you. You're always so thoughtful. Marcus gave her one last squeeze before letting go. Okay. I love you, Mom. I love you too, she whispered. Watching as he turned and padded back to his room, Jasmine sat back down at the table, her resolve strengthening. She wasn't going to let this be the end. She would not fail. Not again. This was her chance to prove to herself, to Marcus, and to everyone that she could have both, a successful career and a fulfilling family life. The next morning, Jasmine flew to the investor's office, her nerves in check but the pressure mounting with every step. She was dressed in her usual business attire, but today it felt heavier. As she walked into the sleek glass building, she was acutely aware of how much was riding on this moment. She had spent hours preparing, going over every detail of the proposal, every number, every projection. She knew the data inside and out. But the reality was, there was always the chance it wouldn't be enough. Investors were notoriously tough, especially when it came to risky ventures like hers. Inside the conference room, Jasmine was greeted by a group of sharp-suited executives, each one more intimidating than the last. They exchanged pleasantries, but it was clear from the start that they were here to get answers, not to make small talk. Jasmine sat at the head of the table, Mark beside her. The presentation began, and she launched into her pitch, explaining the numbers, the risks, and the rewards in detail. She could feel the eyes of the investors on her, their gaze intense and calculating. Every word she spoke felt like it was hanging in the balance. Halfway through, one of the investors, an older man with steely eyes, cut her off. Jasmine, he said, his voice low, we've heard the numbers, but what we're really concerned about is your leadership. You've had some personal challenges lately. How can we be sure you'll be able to deliver on the promises you've made? Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The personal attacks had come sooner than she had expected. She had braced for questions about the project, about the financials, but not this. Her mind raced, but she didn't flinch. This was her moment to prove that she was more than just her struggles, more than her balancing act. This was the moment to show them who she really was. I'm not perfect, she said, her voice steady but passionate. But I'm committed. I've learned the value of balance, how to lead, how to prioritize, and how to build something that lasts. My personal life has made me stronger, and that strength will reflect in the work I do for you. There was a silence in the room, a moment where Jasmine could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. But she didn't waver. She knew this was the truth, and now they would know it too. Jasmine sat in the sterile, modern conference room, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She had said everything she needed to say, but now, everything was out of her hands. The investors were deliberating. She could hear the quiet hum of conversation among the executives as they discussed the project, their voices low and hushed. Every word, every gesture felt like it carried the fate of the entire endeavor. It was hard to breathe. Jasmine's palms were clammy, and her mind raced with thoughts of her family, her son, and the sacrifices she had made to get to this point. She had given everything to this project. If it failed, it wasn't just a professional loss. It would feel like the end of everything she had worked for. She glanced at Mark, who sat beside her, his face calm but his jaw tight. He'd been her ally throughout this process, her sounding board, but even he seemed on edge. They both knew the stakes. The door opened, and one of the investors, the older man who had questioned her leadership earlier, entered the room. His face was unreadable, and for a moment, Jasmine thought her heart might stop. Jasmine, he said, his voice flat, we've reviewed the proposal in detail. It's clear you've put in a tremendous amount of work. The numbers check out. Your vision is solid. He paused, and Jasmine held her breath. But we still have concerns. This is a large investment, and frankly, we're not entirely convinced you can handle the pressure. Jasmine's throat tightened. She had expected this. She had known it wouldn't be easy to convince them, but hearing those words, spoken so plainly, felt like a punch to the gut. However, he continued, his eyes studying her, I have to admit, your persistence has impressed us. You've faced personal challenges and still managed to deliver on all fronts. That speaks volumes. Jasmine's heart skipped. Was this a good sign? She wasn't sure, but she clung to the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, she was about to hear something positive. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, the man said. You've still got a lot to prove. But, after much consideration, we're willing to take a chance on you. Jasmine froze. Was she hearing correctly? Her mind raced to catch up with the words. Take a chance on her? After everything she'd gone through, after all the sleepless nights, after the doubts she'd faced, could it really be happening? The investor smiled, albeit briefly. We'll proceed with the investment, but there are conditions. We'll need you to meet certain milestones over the next 6 months, and we'll be checking in regularly. No room for error. Are you up for that challenge? Jasmine blinked, her mind still catching up with the reality of the situation. She had done it. She had secured the investment. It wasn't a guarantee of success, but it was a chance. A real chance. I'm up for it, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. I won't let you down. Mark turned to her with a grin, his eyes wide with disbelief. You did it, Jasmine. You actually did it. Jasmine nodded, the adrenaline surging through her veins. This was it. This was the turning point she had been waiting for. The storm had passed, and now, the sky was clearing. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt like she could breathe again. As the investors stood to shake her hand, Jasmine felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had worked so hard to get here, and now it was paying off. She had proven herself, not just to them, but to herself. She had found her strength, and now it was time to show the world what she was capable of. Later that evening, as Jasmine walked out of the conference building, the weight of the day slowly began to sink in. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the air, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to smile. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Marcus. Mom, I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it. Tears stung her eyes as she read the message. She had done it. For Marcus. For herself. For all of them. It wasn't just a business victory. It was a victory of the heart. Jasmine had come so far, and no matter what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She was strong enough to handle it. Jasmine stood in the quiet of her living room, looking out the window at the bustling city below. The weight of the past few months, the sleepless nights, the doubts, the triumphs, and the setbacks, all seemed to hang in the air like a memory that had yet to fully fade. But today, everything felt different. Today, it felt like a new chapter was beginning, one where the future was wide open, full of possibilities. She glanced at the framed photo on the shelf, a picture of her and Marcus, both of them smiling on a sunny afternoon, carefree and happy. The reminder of why she fought so hard, why she pushed through every obstacle, brought a soft smile to her face. The last few months had been a whirlwind. She had proven herself to the investors, and the project was on track. The business was thriving, and the company had already started seeing the returns they had hoped for. But it wasn't just about the money or the accolades anymore. It was about something deeper. Jasmine had learned to trust herself again, to believe in her abilities, to know that no matter what life threw at her, she could rise to the challenge. The person who had walked into that first meeting with the investors was not the same person who was standing here now. She had grown, not just as a businesswoman, but as a mother, a daughter, and a woman who had fought for what she believed in. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Mark. I just got the latest projections. We're ahead of schedule. You did it, Jasmine. The whole team is celebrating. Jasmine chuckled softly, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. They had done it. The team was stronger than ever, and they were all riding on the momentum they had built. But more importantly, she had done this for herself. She had shown that she could achieve greatness without sacrificing the things she loved most. Her family, her son. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Marcus. Mom, I know I've said this before, but I'm so proud of you. You're the best. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The simple words, coming from her son, meant everything. She had spent so long trying to prove herself to others, to the investors, to the world. But now, with Marcus's words, she realized that the only approval she truly needed was his. And she had it. She had his love. And that was worth more than any business success. As she set her phone down, Jasmine felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had reached the end of this chapter in her life, but she knew it wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. There were new goals to set, new challenges to face, and new dreams to chase. But whatever came next, Jasmine knew she was ready. She had proven her strength, and nothing could take that away. She had found her balance, her sense of purpose, and her power. And she knew that no matter what the future held, she would face it head-on, with the same determination and heart that had carried her this far. The sun had set, and the city lights flickered on, casting a warm glow across the skyline. Jasmine walked over to the window, looking out at the horizon. She felt a sense of calm wash over her as she took a deep breath. The world was hers to conquer, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace it. "Here's to the next chapter," she whispered to herself, a smile on her lips. And with that, Jasmine knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength, the same heart, and the same unwavering belief that anything was possible.